Cool. So, hello everybody.
Hi.
I'm Brett from WCU, video producer. And like the whole meaning for this topic came up like for several years in a row of people like really wanting to know how to get juicy answers from interview subjects. Like, there's not really a good way to learn that without making a ton of mistakes. So I figured a panel showing like all the different approaches, because everybody does it a different way, would be the best way to do that. And so I sourced some of our finest members, which I'll have you introduce yourselves now. Start with you.
Okay. Hey, my name is Andre Quiles. I'm a videographer at Kennesaw State University. I've been there for 2 years.
Hi, my name's Charissa King-O'Brien. I work for Cornell Engineering specifically, and I'm a multimedia producer and coordinator. And I have a background in documentary filmmaking. I've made 4 documentaries to have distributors, so I have that background going in.
I'm Andrew Diamond, director of photo and video at Utah State University, but my love is in video, I guess. So that's what I do mostly. Been doing this for 12 years now. Done a lot of extensive interviews across the state of Utah. So
I'm Taylor Crouch. I work for Clemson University College of Science, managing video. And I've been with the university for about 2.5 years, and before that, television production.
So this is kind of designed to give an opportunity to ask like specific questions and get different inputs on it. So at any time, if you have any question or need anybody to elaborate more, feel free. It's kind of more supposed to be an open forum than us just blabbing the whole time. So with that being said, so like context behind getting your interview, a lot of times like you're telling a story, you're informing someone. So getting best sound bites and most genuine portrayal of like that story and that person are like your top goals. But if you just focus on getting what you need out of someone and not treating them like a human, it's not going to go well. Like, they are humans, you know, you have to realize that this may be the only time people sit down in front of cameras. And a lot of times there's 2 cameras, 1 to 3 people, lights, they're mic'd up, sweaty, whatever it might be. Like, it's very intimidating. So keep in mind that their whole outlook on like being interviewed or being willing to go on camera, like kind of rests with how you treat them that time. So like, be gentle. They're little baby birds. And it's important to keep them comfortable, keep their confidence up, and make sure they're clear. Like, you don't want to misportray them. And I think that's something that you learn making a ton of mistakes. Like, there's mistakes we've all made doing interviews that we will never forget. And you suffer for it when you're in the edit. Like, you suffer over and over again, you pull your hair out. So I kind of wanted to touch on that. Like, what are some of the mistakes like you guys have made that is in the back of your head? It's a very painful topic that you like, it's in the front of your mind every time you do an interview.
One thing that always irks me is whenever they say, well, like I said, or again, and I'm like, dang it, because it's just reminding me that, okay, I'm not listening. I'm in my head about the next question that I'm asking. So when I'm really in that moment and they don't say again, that triggers me sometimes. So like, oh, I'm so sorry. Is that like, let's rehash that, or can you rephrase that? So
I think not. Like a lot of times I feel like the best sound bites come back when you have them paraphrase what they talked about. Like, you get so into the weeds of asking a specific question and hoping they give an elaborate answer. Where like a lot of times at the end of the interviews, I'll be like, all right, we talked about all this thing, and like, can you just kind of summarize what this means? Or like, it just, because a lot of times I'll go to that last statement and that's my filler. Like, if you have them start using descriptive words throughout every little answer and you're like, I don't have them saying that. They're always describing things. Now I got 7 sentences of them saying this weird object, and I don't want to have that in it every time. So I think paraphrasing, like, there's sometimes where I don't have them just go back and just kind of explain their story at the end.
I had a professor who would tell a story and he'd get to the best point and then he would just like change the subject or like immediately go to something else. I'm like, no. So I think having them restate, well, first of all, having them restate the question in the beginning of the answers. Everyone probably does that. And just, I have them go over the questions like twice. I do 2 rounds. And they probably find it really annoying, but I'm just like, hey, like, can you just answer that question when we're done? And by the second time, I usually get a soundbite.
Yeah, so like that prep work is really important. We were talking about this earlier, and like the last thing you want to do is meet them for the first time and just say, take your seat and roll. Like, I think that's the most dehumanizing thing. Like, there's people, that sort of thing. So like, how do you prep your subjects? Like, what do you tell them to prepare them for like what you're looking for, how things will go, whether it's like run time or like how you want them to, what tense to put their verbs in, like, and that sort of thing. Like, how do you prep them before you start rolling, right?
Oh, you guys have a question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. In addition to all that, so like, I guess I have to ask all of you, like, in terms of prep work, I think something that we try to balance is, so obviously the subject knows that they're going to get interviewed or two before, in most cases. And so we sometimes like don't, like we don't want to give them the questions ahead of time because then they think about it and like sometimes they try to like script out an answer. So where do you all like find that balance of like giving them questions or just giving them a kind of like an overview of what you're going to do, or like how do you all approach doing that?
I think because you're talking about like prepping people at the beginning. I think one thing that I failed to do whenever I first started was talking with the subject and just telling them my intentions for what I was doing. Because a lot of the times, if you're nervous, you can just start to say, oh, well, A, B, and C happened, and that's literally what happened. But it's like, okay, we want that, but we also want to know how it affected you, how it made you feel, so on and so forth. So I think just like almost being very clear with your intentions can help a lot to have people understand, oh, okay, like I can be a bit more open with these people because that's kind of what they're wanting from me. And then just sitting down at the beginning and just talking with the subject, like you were saying, like treat them like a human. Like we're there to get good sound bites, but also like we don't want to have anyone overshare, especially if they don't want to. So like just saying, hey, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, that's what we want to hear. And again, just like having a good conversation at the beginning. So maybe giving yourself a little bit of padding at the beginning of the interview, just to be like, how's your day going? Like, what have you been up to? Will just make people a lot more comfortable, I found.
I think in the beginning, I maybe I act a little goofy, or everyone seems like really nervous, and when I interview them or in the beginning, and so I'm like, wait, listen, I'm a really good editor, and we could stop and don't worry, I'm gonna cover up your silences or whatever, So making them feel at ease that you're gonna edit this. This is not like a straight. Yes.
Do you guys have like a go-to icebreaker kind of to like ease the tension and like get people comfortable, especially if it's like their first time on camera?
I usually ask people like what their favorite ice cream is. Just because it's such a dumb, like it's just, they come in there and a lot of times if it's like a serious topic, they don't really expect like an off-the-wall question. Because you sit them down, you have like all your lights set up. They're like, okay, cool. So what's your favorite ice cream? Like, what is your favorite type of music? Just to like get them to talk about personal stuff.
I don't have a go-to icebreaker, I guess. I make it an emphasis to put them kind of in the spot and just talk to them without like starting anything. So I'm already having a discussion with them while they're sitting in the chair. They're going to be like interviewing it. Because I feel like if I have that conversation off to the side, which sometimes it happens, like we have hair and makeup and I'm chatting with them there, that's fine. But I don't want to be like, all right, let's go over here. You sit down now. Like lights are dramatic. You know what I mean? And then we're going to hit record. So I don't have like an icebreaker. I just try to get to know them, I guess, and convey that into the scene that they're going to be at, and then just hit record and transition into what we're talking about. And then going to your question really quick, I share concepts, I guess, and try to not share questions, unless I feel like they need to bring out something that they're going to have to try to like recall, like a specific moment or anything. Like I don't want to put them on the spot and be like, okay, let's go back to this day. Run through this, because I hate being put on the spot on my end to try to recall like moments of significance. So those types of things I will share with them.
I've really found a lot of success in working like with a pre-interview, kind of like, so like I really don't like to just rip the Band-Aid off first time I meet them, interview them on camera. So that kind of forms my questions that I'll ask too. So I have a little bit of a rapport. And sometimes I'll shoot my B-roll before my interview. And that way I can ask questions that I know relate to a good sequence I have, or like steer things in a way that'll segue. So like asking questions for the edit in your mind is always, there's just like a million decisions you're making in real time. You're entertaining people. You may be running, who runs the cameras by themselves and interviews? Yeah, it's a lot, right? And it's hard to like disconnect from your thing and be like, oh, ISO, white balance, and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like people vibe off of your vibe. Like you have to be in a conversation. Like it's really tough. So
I would say that sometimes I do give them the questions in advance, but I also edit on the fly in my head as they're, and we have a conversation, and like a poignant question will come up and I'll ask, that's not on my list. So we'll just have this conversation. Obviously, I'm not talking while they're talking, and I also tell them, it might be awkward. There's going to be a moment of silence after you answer. I'm not going to say anything, so I kind of prep them for that kind of thing as well.
okay, so kind of jumping off like some of the last topics, like how do you deal with like a very nervous subject? Like it's going downhill for them.
I mean,
It's gotten worse.
hopefully you have an idea, like you have a pre discussion of like how comfortable they are, so you can have like that. A lot of times if they are super nervous and they don't, I can tell. Like a lot of times like at higher ed, you're put into a position where it's like, oh, I've got to interview the researcher. And so we've kind of tried to shift a lot of times of like, there's students in the lab that can help cover the story. There's like a lot of other people that now the person that's nervous doesn't have to carry the whole story. We just need them to hit like 2 points. And so I'll go that approach a lot of times. But as far as like nervousness and stuff like that, I just try to break down that barrier and match your energy with what you both like. If I don't have energy and I'm just like having a serious conversation, they're going to match that. And that's even worse if you have a student that has a lot of energy, because now they're the boring professor that doesn't have energy. So I just try to match the energy and have some excitement in my questions.
I think sometimes taking them out of that interview, that back and forth between the Q&A, sometimes in the middle, just change my approach and maybe even just be like, hey, hang on 1 second, like off the record, like I want to talk to you about that one thing that you said, like why was that? Like kind of just very casually talk to them. And then they just start to kind of just talk about it a little bit more naturally, like they're talking to me rather than talking for that specific interview. And I think sometimes I can get really good sound bites that way. And then, I mean, hopefully they don't continue to go downhill, because I often find that maybe the beginning is where they're most nervous. And if I can try those tactics to kind of break them up, I'll be like, okay, remember, you told me about that summary of the research. Can you just restate that at the end? And they have more energy and kind of pick up those sound bites again.
There's a lot of power in not breaking the interview and be like, okay, where am I at? You know what I mean? Like just engaging in back and forth conversations and leading them on that way.
Yeah. Yeah, because when you break it, they remember there's cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
Like but you know what I mean? It's like,
Throw them a softball question.
yeah. And I found that like that nervous first quarter of the interview, I know I'm not going to use any of those
Yeah.
responses. And once I get them on a tear, I'll circle back, and that's when I get my juicy squeeze. So
Yeah, that's why I asked the questions again.
yeah.
Totally.
But like a lot, if they're very nervous and like people that are like sorry, like every time they're not happy with their response. In the past, I've like blamed something else, like, oh, we're gonna have to do that again, focus on it, or like something that's my fault, like, we're both not doing good today, something like that, and that helps with some nervous people. But I think that kind of brings me to like 4 different types of subjects you'll encounter. Like I think everybody's all kind of encountered them. The first one's like the rambler.
Mhm.
You have a person that you ask like, what's your name, major, and hometown, and you get a biopic of like their entire existence, you know? So like, what are some of those ways that you calm them down? Because you've already told them like, hey, this is gonna be a 90-second piece. Like, that was a feature-length film you just told me.
Can you restate that in 2 sentences,
Yeah.
2 to 3 sentences? My go-to.
What if they can't?
What if they can't?
They can't stop talking. They're ramblers. They just can't stop talking.
My
Be the voice.
Yeah.
Like if someone rambles a bunch, be like, oh, you know what? I really like where you talked about this and this. Let's just focus on that.
Yeah.
Go over that. We just need short, concise
Yeah,
statements.
like break it up a bit. Yeah, just finding those key elements. I mean, like, okay, yeah, let's take these 3 things that you talked about. Let's hit those.
Sometimes I'll tell them that like, hey, we're gonna do like the feature-length documentary, but then we're also gonna do like a little social cut.
Mhm.
So like, I'm gonna ask you for 2 versions of all your responses, like one super short to the point, and one like you can ramble on a little bit. But then I end up always using the short one for both pieces.
Yeah.
There may not even be a second short piece, but it works for them in the moment. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So, okay. Second one is the overly short and like disinterested person. So like, these are people that like give you a comically unuseful answer. Like, it may have context of the question in it, but it may not. Like, they don't want to be there. Like, it's a researcher who's just on a whole media tour or something. Like, they don't want to be there. You might not want to be there, but you need to get something out of it.
I feel like asking them, so if they're like kind of short with their answers, just asking them like, what do you mean by that? And just like kind of forcing them to like,
Mean it all.
what do you, yeah, because sometimes we'll ask people something and they'll just be like, yeah, or yeah, I think that this happened. And it's like, okay, but like, what do you mean? And like forcing them to break down what they just said can kind of help at least get something out of them. But it can be pretty tough for you.
Yeah.
I think there's 2 things you're balancing. You want to get information, but you also want to touch on some form of emotion. And so I don't know, like if they're not giving me any emotion, I don't know what the trick is, but I'm always having that in the back of my head for videos. I don't know if any of you, because you want that candid
Mm.
response, you know, that might be the hook of the video that I want to begin with. I'm like, yes, I got that hook to begin with, but yeah, it is tricky.
Yeah, when you can get that little bit of emotion from someone who has given you nothing the whole time, but it's an off-the-cuff question like you're talking about, it usually is. And it's like the saving grace for that part of the video. Or if you can make people cry, that's always a hit. All right, so number 3, you kind of have we already kind of covered this, like you have the nervous, shaky voice. You did a sound check, and then in the interview, they're like 10 dB lower than the sound check, like whispering, you know? So they tend to like not even answer your actual question. So like, this is along that confidence thing. Like, what do you do to help build that confidence up in that subject and like get them back on their feet?
I mean, I always try to play the room with as many people as I can first, so that there's less people like pissing at them. But as far as the confidence of speaking, I think it comes down to just breaking them at very at the beginning. But the reality is, I mean, there's people that it doesn't matter how many different ways you try it. Like there's some people that just are not comfortable, and it kind of stinks because then you're like, do you include them? Do you not? You probably interviewed them, but
I think trying to figure out where they're coming from, because I think some people can just really draw a blank in the moment and literally just kind of forget everything. So maybe helping them through that and, you know, saying, you know, talking them through what they want to say through the recording, to kind of put their mind back, you know, to those types of questions. And I've worked recently with some seniors to do a feature, and they were really shy and nervous, and you would ask them about their experience and it was just no, and like, no, that doesn't affect me. And they were twins, like, do you guys have any funny things that happened between you? No. And it's just like everything was no. And so it was like this whole twin story that was kind of going nowhere. But we just kind of had a casual conversation and kind of just got them kind of talking, and they kind of forgot about that space in that moment. And then towards the end, we got some more sound bites. But I think just kind of having that empathy for them. I mean, we certainly do because we're behind the camera, so we're kind of in that same spot.
Sometimes they think the interview's over, and I'm always recording.
Yes, yeah.
As much as I can.
Yeah.
And then- yeah.
I think what you were saying earlier, because I've done this before, if they're like really nervous and they're like kind of stumbling over the words, it's like, okay, like what are you trying to say? And it's kind of like, oh, they kind of feel like you stopped recording and now we're just talking. They will legitimately say exactly what they've been trying to say the whole time, but just because you were like, okay, what are you trying to say? Just talk to me. Like, don't even think about this. We're not even recording. Like, literally just like kind of tricking them is kind of like a good way to get it. Just because you just forget about it, like because they know that kind of the camera is almost like the bad thing, and you're kind of their safety throughout the whole thing. You're like their tether in a way. So I just think trying that can also help people kind of build their confidence and like getting out sound bites when it's like really difficult.
And then you try to stay quiet.
Yeah. You're like, okay, everybody do that.
Lots of eye contact.
Just like smiling. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also want to state that he did not give any of the prompts to us beforehand, so I feel like we're being interviewed.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like that reminds me of like something that I would catch myself doing earlier in my careers, like the power of like silence after you think they're finished answering. Like sometimes if you just kind of hold that, like if they're doing well, right? So we got a solid B+ subject, and you just kind of hold that silence, and sometimes they have to fill it. You know what I mean? And you'll get some like really good stuff. But when I hear my voice, like, okay, great, like right on the end of it, that's always like nails on chalkboard. Because I knew I missed something.
It's like let them cook.
Yeah, let them cook. Yeah.
It's so true, because you just need to wait them out, basically.
Mhm.
I think that's what some teachers do as well in the classroom. Just wait them out, and it's really uncomfortable. But then sometimes they end up talking. It's something worthwhile.
Always my last question is there anything else we left off that you feel like we should have talked about? Because half the time they just go into something they feel like is important.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the final question.
Yeah,
Did you want
like
to cover
I'm
anything
done
else?
on my end. Is there anything else that
Yeah.
you feel like we should have talked about that we didn't?
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, I like to ask students like, what would you tell yourself as an incoming freshman or something? Like a lot of like students will do or juniors or seniors, and or like what's changed most about you. And like I'll add some questions for like compilation videos that are for a different project later, and like stack those on. And a lot of those work as really good icebreakers, like in the middle of someone going downhill, you know. And that kind of turns it around because it's like everybody has an answer for it, you know. And some of these students have like pretty incredible stories, and it's like very emotional. So sometimes you need to bail them out of that, you know what I mean, and get them back to like a little bit of comfort. So like I know you like to pull the emotion out. Like, is there a limit to that, or would you let them like have a full meltdown?
No, not
Okay.
at all. But yeah, I do go to those simple questions like, why Cornell? Why did you choose to come to Cornell? And it might not be relevant. Obviously, I'm not asking professor, but it might not be relevant. But it does tend to like help them have a conversation.
Yeah, I think like those throwaway questions really do help. Because it's like pancakes. Like the first ones are the worst ones. So like I know like the first 5 questions I'm gonna ask probably are just gonna be burners. So you might as well just like those softball questions or like the funny ones or whatever it might be. They tend to help a lot. Kind of sets the stage. But do you ever come back to a question? Like if it's really not going well in the beginning, they start to get their confidence back. Do you come back to that question?
Yes.
Yeah.
If I feel like it's critical. Yeah. Like as they're talking, I'm kind of piecing together like I have a story arc going in. Kind of see what they're talking about. If there's part of that, I'm like, I've got to start with this. Like, they need a better like rock every time.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Like our approach to like what questions we're asking, like your story arc. How do you determine that? Like, because a lot of times with like short docs or something, we do a lot of those. It always takes on like its own little path, right? like you kind of have to follow the story of the student, and you kind of find out a lot more than what the project request was, or however it came in. So like, how do you like mold that story into something that's like very personable and real and a good arc?
I think first of all, like it depends on the video, like what is the video about? Who's your audience? Like, I always have that in the back of my head. No, I forgot what I was gonna say. And that's what happens to the students. You have to redirect, but I don't know. I mean, you have research videos, you have student project teams, highlights, or whatever. There's all sorts of different types of videos. So you have to like really, think about that while you're going into it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that. So like, because sometimes, I mean, I think we always want to find that like emotional aspect. And like for short docs, I think that that's great. But we just recently did a bunch of research videos. So like, there's a bunch of researchers, and we went and interviewed them in their lab, and then we talked with a bunch of their students. And we were definitely going for like a more emotional element because we're like, why is research important? But that wasn't like the focus of the video. But we always want to try to have that in everything. But it was mainly like, what are you doing in your lab? What can students do? How can students like get value out of this? So I think like determining what you're looking for in the video is going to be key. It's not always going to be emotional. Like, yeah, we want to know why you find this research important, but like we also want to see like literally what are students doing? Why should you come to KSU? Stuff like that. But then I did like a mini doc before, and I was like, okay, I want this to be emotional. I want to know why these students chose to do theater. Like, why become an actor? Why do all of these things? Why put in the extra effort when you don't have to as a student? So I think that's when the pre-interview comes in. Because you can sit down with these people and it's very low key over like a Zoom call or whatever, and just try to learn the person, try to understand like why are you doing this? What are your interests, and literally just like getting those nuggets of information and building the story off of that. Because I think that's when the emotion is important, of like showing why someone would bother doing something.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think like separating it between like, okay, what are my actual values with the video, and then going from there.
And emotion doesn't mean like crying. It means like, their level of like, are they passionate about this?
Yeah.
I think passion is the right word.
Yeah.
I think,
Well, I mean, I would just say that a lot of times I don't have the luxury of a pre-interview. In the last session, we were talking about people were mentioning how they didn't have time with the professor, and that's definitely my situation. I'm sharing an hour with the photographer and also trying to get the interview and get the B-roll and trying to figure out what the heck this research is about. Sometimes I do have the transcript from the writer who's already done an interview. But sometimes it's just, I'm in there and I just set the frame like, hey, I know your research is about, these big terms, but I need you to kind of break it down for me. And what we're going to do is a breakdown from the article that your research paper is very technical. The news article is a little bit of a summary of your research paper. And what I'm doing is a summary of this news article. So we need to kind of simplify it and kind of frame it based on that audience. I think the genuine interest really helps. I love what I do with scientists because I feel like it's very fulfilling. Like they're doing really cool work. So, and they're very eager to talk about their work. Sometimes we can get caught up in the terminology and I'm like, okay, I understood that first part, but not the second part. And we can kind of go from there. And I think planning as much as possible is helpful, but also planning to be flexible is most helpful, especially with scientists, because they may be too technical for some of your questions. And I just need to throw away that idea that I had about them talking about something that I thought was so simple and just moving on to something that they can articulate so well. And probably like you and everybody else here, in your head, you're constantly cutting like, okay, that's a good soundbite, that's a good soundbite, that's how I'm going to end, that's how I'm going to start this video. And at the end, you're like trying to figure out, okay, do we need an ending or do you need a way to start this? And just guiding them to get that one soundbite to piece it together.
Yeah, and with students, or anyone like researcher, pretend you're explaining this to your grandparents, is something that I always go to. Because people, your audience might not be in that field, so will understand you. So can you answer that in a way that you're telling your dad or mom, I don't know, who is not a scientist?
Yeah, they have to get that jargon out of their system at least once. So. Like
It's tough with
acronyms. And then
yeah.
so what's something that someone's like personally had problems with that in your interview?
So this was kind of going back to how you were talking about me as that like shakier, like nervous person. I think something I've started to realize, especially more and more with the like students especially, and just kind of like introverts in general, is the like lack of maintaining eye contact.
Yeah.
So like even though they're obviously like looking off camera at me while I'm talking to them, it's like we're having a normal conversation, and then as soon as I say that we're going, or like as soon as they think that the interview is started, and they're trying to like recall their thoughts and everything, they do the like look up while they can think and like gather themselves. And so it's like all I'm getting is like just the whites of their eyes in the camera. So I'm just wondering how, if at all, you've ever dealt with that.
So B-roll's for.
Yeah. Just say look at me, yeah.
Hey, do you mind looking over at me?
I like the tight shot when that happens. Because it's like we kind of play around with how much of a profile shot it is or what the angle is, but it's up to you and your style. But and then there's always like the B-roll thing.
Yeah.
But
I think I've struggled with some people who it's like they can't maintain the contact like at all. Because I always do the same thing where it's like, well, I'll B-roll and I can cut to the different shot and they like look up into the corner or whatever. But yeah.
oh, like consistent.
Yeah, it's like as soon as they start talking, they just can't look at you. Yeah.
Did you try grabbing them by the face and say, look at me?
Look at me when I'm talking. Yeah. I guess the inverse to that, as I'm not looking at you guys while I'm thinking of that. So something I've been trying to do a lot more of is kind of the more modern style of kind of setting the subject in the center of the frame for one of the shots, and then having your tight shot. But then the challenge I've had with that is that I've realized that now I'm putting the camera like directly in front of them, when I feel like if they're more looking off to the side of me, they have that luxury of like you said, like I'm their tether, like I'm the thing that they could be like, oh, this is the human I'm talking to. But now I'm like asking people to stare directly down the barrel of the camera. And I just wondered if
Like deliver into the camera?
yeah, so like I feel like I've seen a lot more documentaries now where it's like they have that wide establishing shot where the subject is sitting in the center of the room and they start to talk directly into camera. And so we've been trying to do that a little bit more. And so far we haven't had too many big hangups, but like I know that is even like so much more intimidating than like talking to an actual person. So I was just wondering like if you all are starting to do that and like any best practices you have for that.
I like that style. I know.
I do too.
Yeah, and it almost seems, there is a question in the back, but just a moment. Is it related to?
Oh, I was just gonna say that they make these mirrors that are angled that are sort of like a teleprompter style thing, so they're looking at your face while they're looking into the camera.
Didn't know that existed.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just reminded of like a teleprompter kind of style.
Yeah.
That helps as well, yeah, what you're saying.
I've played around with the contact into the lens, but I'll do it as like their last statement, or their introduction statement. And then like it really doesn't go well at the beginning of an interview, like when they're at their most nervous, especially if you have the nervous type 2. But at the end, they're feeling good, they've done a great job, and I'll just like get another take where they're looking into either the wide or the tight and like deliver some kind of message. And I either usually don't use it, but I haven't had good luck with them delivering straight into the camera.
But don't you think it's more of something that they memorized? I mean, it's kind of like New York Times.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mix. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we've definitely done it when like, the president or somebody has to give like a specific announcement, and they'll put like a teleprompter up and that's like not a problem. But yeah, if it's more of like a, kind of like more of an interview where I'm trying to get something organic, then yeah, it is tricky. But I do like it. It's a really good look.
Yeah,
I'd probably scratch it if they're like constantly struggling, right?
Yeah.
You don't want half your interview where they're like kind of looking at it, but then just like looking everywhere and just be like, all right, this guy or girl's not set up for this, so let's just look at me instead, or A lot of times,
Just being like right behind the camera.
yeah.
I try and do that, and I'm like, just.
Yeah.
And I will tell like people that have a problem with their eyes wandering, like usually when I'm talking to them, I'll be like, if I ever just go like this, I'm not interrupting you, just try to.
That's intimidating. My dad used to do that.
But the nice thing is like when I do it, if I tell them that in advance and they're giving an answer and I do this, and like they catch themselves like a lot of times they'll still give their answer and bring their attention back on me without like breaking it. Whereas if I don't say anything and I'm just like, they're like, what? You know what I mean? But like if I need to say a statement that they're giving, sometimes that helps.
We've done a few interviews like that, and kind of how we found success is literally just like the interviewer would be next to the camera, and then we would just have the conversation as in like, okay, this is the first question, and then we would basically kind of work through that because a lot of the times it was for like big branding shoots. So we would kind of establish what we wanted them to say and what was more comfortable for them to say. And then we'd be like, okay, cool, now deliver it. Just now look into the camera, and then we work through it.
Yeah.
So we'll get like 2 or 3 like really good takes of that, and then we're like, okay, cool, moving on. That's like I think kind of the best way. Or you could sit directly behind the camera, but it's like if you want them delivering directly in, it's kind of difficult. This other thing we did, this was really weird. So we were interviewing students, they were talking directly into camera, and this one student, he only wanted to like memorize exactly what he was going to say before he delivered it. And it was rough. We were sitting there for like 30 minutes trying to get him to like just get through like a paragraph. Oh, good. But what we ended up doing was after a while, I was like, okay, just cut. So we just talked with him and said, okay, what are you looking to say? So we had our teleprompter there. We set up the teleprompter, and then we just typed in exactly what he wanted to say, and then he read off what he was saying for the interview.
That's a good idea.
And it worked. It's kind of like a weird workaround, but
How did it come across?
it still came across as genuine. It's just like some people are very like regimented in like everything that they're saying. So I think that like he just needed like that structure. You know, other people came up and like knocked it out of the park. But yeah.
You had a question?
Yeah, one struggle I've had is we have a lot of researchers from overseas, and English isn't their primary language. How do y'all approach that sort of issue with interviews?
Is it like
Like I had one girl that we were doing a piece on, she got a piano in the common space because she wanted a place for kids to just, play and have camaraderie with each other. And it was just like apparent that she wasn't very comfortable with her English. She was very self-conscious about it. Her answers were scripted, but in a very mechanical way. And we were doing it, and I was doing everything I could to make her comfortable and to kind of like guide the answers. I mean, I almost got to the point where I was like, can you write it down and repeat it sort of thing? But I didn't want to go there because that made them even more self-conscious. So just curious if y'all have had issues like that and maybe ways that you remedied the situation.
I mean, you could do that, have them read it. I think that's a benefit, of giving the questions in advance. And that kind of gives them a little more confidence with their answers. That's something that I would do. Yeah, I mean, I like what you're doing. Like you have different tactics and you try them.
I've seen pieces where they like had someone do kind of a voiceover for them. I don't know if it's to that point or if that's acceptable for you, but I've seen those pieces and I think that may fit if you're interested. I don't know, but it sounds like she doesn't want to hear her own voice, but her answers and her story needs to come across regardless.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think that's what we ended up doing was sort of like, can you just read that? And then I just use B-roll on top of it. And,
Sure.
And then kind of cut her interview a little bit less.
Oh, so it was, okay. But you were like pretty close to being, where she didn't want to use her own voice for it.
She just lacked the confidence but she was the person that got that piano. So like we interviewed some other students, but she just.
Did you try an audio only B-roll or audio only interview?
So what?
Just do an audio only interview without the cameras? Do you think-
No. Well, I mean, usually we film it just because, I like the A-roll.
I mean, I think having a person read it is what I would do. I have done that in the past. Sometimes, so there's this like, my boss sometimes writes a rough script or whatever. He's like, this is what the points that we want to get across. And we'll give it to the people we're going to be interviewing. And I don't know how I feel about that. Sometimes the professor will read it and then we'll use it as voiceover. From a documentary filmmaking standpoint, this seems wrong. But sometimes that helps, or sometimes it works, having the person read it or paraphrase it.
And I
And-
think,
yeah.
I was gonna just add, breaking it down and not expecting them to give elaborate answers. Because we also deal with, folks that have second languages. So I think one way is kind of setting the expectations, maybe like, okay, I'm thinking that this video will start with my research is peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and then literally just having them say that and keeping it very short so that it is very understandable in that moment and just kind of simplifying it more.
I think if I had an idea that they were going to struggle, like either just language barrier or anything like that in advance, I would maybe consider what he was saying is just like, maybe I need to change, maybe it's not interview driven story. We'll do a voiceover. Maybe we can come back to him for like one small statement to support it and bring in like a student statement, but the story isn't necessarily carried by that person just because all your efforts, like you said, might not really make a big impact on it.
That's helpful. I mean, in that case, we kind of got on location and weren't aware that that was going to happen. You know, when we did the pre-interview, everything seemed like great, fine, and then they got in front of the camera, and then that's instantly when they were like, "I don't know why I'm doing this," or just like could not get it out of them. But yeah, I think those are all very useful and helpful.
And that's kind of like the craziest thing about people is that you can have the most extroverted person clam up like and be a sweat ball. And then you can have the most introverted person knock it out of the park, crush it, and not even flinch. Like it's a roll of the dice every time. But like the thing about like what we do is we're not working with people who are like trained actors. We're working with everyday people, just incredible human beings. So it takes a little bit more approach to it. And I think like keeping in mind that like they're human and being a human first and a producer second is like above all else, like the first step, I think, to getting good sound bites. I don't know how y'all feel about it. Maybe just doing this a lot. So going in with a plan. Oh, sorry. You got a question back there?
So another interview question. Yeah, it's not a problem we've had before, but we recently interviewed a child as part of a testimonial piece for this eye infirmary on campus. And so we were asking questions about this surgery where his eye was removed. And we interviewed his mom too, and it was great. And then, he was giving like one syllable answers. He was super quiet, super uncomfortable. Tried to talk to him about like what his mom said he likes, like basketball, Fortnite, all this stuff. But we had his mom interview him too, and he was just so nervous. Do you have any advice on how to break attention when like it's not an adult?
Yeah. I've had that one time because kids give good answers as long as they don't get a nap or food. You're not getting around that. But that's when I've tried like a walking shot. Like I'll just because kids like to move around, and I'll just do like the whole like gimbal shot, have them like walk with their mom and like hold their hand, and that helped in the one time that I had to use it. But kids are tough, man. And I'm sure as soon as you stop the cameras, it's like full of life.
Yeah, I mean, after the interview, we were like, "Oh, let's get some B-roll, raw, and
Yeah.
do a basketball court." It was just on.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
definitely the lights and the cameras. Yeah.
You're just making like helping them work if they're being interviewed, so you gotta like take them out of the interview space.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be like that. It's gonna be a lot more difficult to get it, but I think that's probably the best way. We did this one thing. We were interviewing a researcher. He was studying like flies or something, and he was explaining to his son what his research was. So they were both on camera. So I don't know if that would be an option, just to have both of them, together being interviewed. But we would just ask them a question of like, "Hey, explain this to your son," whatever. And they were great. They were just like riffing off of each other. I think his son was like maybe 8. But it worked out really, really well just because they were on it together.
Comfortable.
And he was super comfortable. Yeah. And we're all just like cracking up the entire time. So I don't know, maybe breaking the tension like that could help if you could get the parent on as well.
I personally wouldn't do the interview in front of the lights. I would do cinema verite style, outside of the interview space. And I don't know if you have a wireless mic or a shotgun and just recorded that.
Right.
What?
Right.
Brad. Candy.
Skits. Yeah. Work.
It's never out of the option.
Yeah. So like, let's talk about like the plans we take into an interview. How do y'all approach it? Like, not just, I guess, the overall kind of production, how you would structure your interview. Do you shoot your B-roll first? Ask questions about those things in the interview? Do you inform what B-roll you're going to shoot based on the interview that you already did? Like, what's your approach to that?
I like knowing, like, I have to know going into it if I'm gonna have good opportunities for B-roll. Because then I need to know, like, how precise, concise I need their delivery. I mean, because I hate doing just long form cutting back and forth where I can't get my story. So that's like a huge element. Obviously, knowing the story arc going into it is always a plus. Trying to do what else.
Can you restate that question?
So like your approach, do you, like when you're thinking about your story and like your approach to producing it, do you use your B-roll that you've already shot to inform the questions you're asking? Or do you do it the other way around, to shoot your interview first and go capture the B-roll that you have good sound bites for?
I definitely try to capture the B-roll afterwards, if I can.
Yeah, I would say.
Well, let's talk about segues, 'cause that's the hardest. Let's segue to segues, because like you have to connect all these different parts of the story, and you have to be like hearing that and recording that in your head, thinking about the edit. Like, how do you keep track of all that and like try and keep the story flowing? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think just going in like prepared with what I usually have is like I'll have notes on kind of like exactly kind of like the structure that I wanted to have, and I'll go into the interview with that. And just like as I'm asking the questions, it's like, okay, well, I kind of want to like emphasize a little bit on this, and then just using that as like my baseline. So it's like, okay, I know exactly what I need. That makes sense.
A lot of times if I have like my 5 main points of my story arc or whatever, I'll follow back up and say, okay, tell me how this connects to this. Or tell me how you get from here to here, and like purposefully force kind of a transition statement if I'm worried about it and haven't answered it.
Same.
Yeah, I think you're gonna say something like that.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
So I'm listening to this a little bit as just an interview process. And I have a question about like really tricky topics. Like if you're trying to get someone to speak out about maybe what's not going well, because you want to use like it's, I don't know exactly the purpose, but or if they're saying too much and you need to quiet them, like if you get something on tape that you shouldn't have.
Yeah.
Like, what do you do? I mean, obviously you don't use it, but
First off, that's a good sign if they're opening up to you. So I take that as a good signal.
okay.
But obviously, like,
And
That's-
you
no
can-
one's gonna ever
And
see
you
it.
can get a great feist,
right,
right?
right. But
And
it just means, like, for me, like, that would signal, like, okay, this person's willing to open up. But yeah, kind of hold that hand to, like, make sure we stay in the bounds of academia's, kind of standard. There's like guardrails, you know what I mean? Like, we can only go so far. It doesn't happen that often, really.
well, I'm thinking of like areas of, we did a student journey project where we interviewed our students over 4 years. It was huge. We're not a video team. It was a lot. But they were giving us content that where they would be like, yeah, UB doesn't show, my university, University of Buffalo, isn't showing up in DEI. You know, and part of it was us saying, like, share your true experiences, you know, but part of it also was, you know, like handling some real feedback that is authentic to a, here's a student experience essay over 4 years that went through a pandemic. You know, and like, so how do you choose how real sometimes you'll get with an interview?
Good question.
Well, it's like, I guess there's like, yeah, what you can use and what like your department leads will ever let come out, like, and then what you can, like.
Yeah, I mean, if you're PR and you're marketing for the university, you probably shouldn't be putting negative things out there. So like, I think it's fine if they want to share it. I would just bring your attention on things that you. I wouldn't necessarily say like, oh, don't say like we can't use that or anything. I wouldn't call it out. I would just refocus your attention on what you're hoping to share.
It's interesting, 'cause, like, there were a lot of times where we wanted to be vulnerable as a university and share it. It was also an editorial project. It was a very interesting space, and it sounds like none of you guys get into that.
I've worked in such risk averse places that, yeah, I feel for you. Like, but somebody needs to see and hear that. It's not the public, right? Like, that's feedback. Yeah. And it's funny because we ask for feedback, but we want praise. Like, that's what that project was. Like, we want your experience of how awesome we are. We don't really want to hear it, but then they got it.
You could follow up and just say like try to see if there's like a positive outcome later. Like, you know,
Try to spin it.
at the beginning it was bad. Like, did that ever change? Was there someone that made a difference? Like,
Yeah, that's
take the negative thing and try to find like a positive side of it.
And that happens a lot to us and our senior features because it's the end of the semester. They're trying to graduate. Like, it's the hardest moment for them. And I just took out the question, like, what challenged you and how did you overcome it? Because they always say, like, this is the hardest major on campus and all this stuff. I'm like, okay, we don't necessarily want to use that. But sometimes you do want to be vulnerable and they might have a story to share. Like, this was really challenging, but I had professors there to help me through it and mentors. And so if we can kind of take that piece too, that would be a way that we would be able to use it.
Okay. Go ahead.
Like for me, most of my videos are around student-led projects. And with the nature of that type of experimentation, failures happen, but they're still learning in our professionals yet. So often I'll get the, this professor was awful, horrible experience with him. I'll leave that out. But I'll be honest, this is what we tried. This is what didn't work. This is how we tried to overcome that. And it's just trying to provide a very accurate portrayal.
Thank you.
How do you manage pushback against higher ups, I guess, as far as like, they want to produce something. So we had a video where they wanted to produce a history of our finance history, has ups and downs. And then we make it takes like a month to produce, and then put it up, present it to them. They go through it a couple times, and then at the very end say, oh, we're just not gonna do that. Do you ever like push back against senior leadership and try to get them to like see it from another angle, or see if like, can we recut this or something else, or like use it so it's not just a wasted time?
Yeah, well, I'm an extremely manipulative person, so I go for that angle. No, those are tough. Like, that's such a heartbreaker. That happened, what, 3 months ago? And it was something that they ordered. Like, they ordered the burger, and I gave them a burger, and they said, I wanted pizza. You know what I mean? And like, they were on 3 stages of approval, and then everything was crickets after like V3. They were like, this isn't what we wanted. It's like, well, it is. Like, it was scripted. Like, you wrote the script. And it's still sitting there in nothingness. And it's just tough because, like, we can only argue so high. We work with departments across campus, and it's like, it was a cooperation between 3 departments, and like, we're just the one that made it. And that's like super frustrating to me. If anybody has like a success in that, I'd love to hear it. Is yours still dead?
Oh, yeah, it's definitely.
Yeah. What was it? What was the holdup? The
Well,
truth?
Yeah, basically. Because they've tried to tell the story a bunch of times over the last like 10 years, and every time it's made, and then they're like, oh, it's not quite what we want. And then it's
Should
just.
sell it to a documentary, to talk like, have it pushed, have it linked.
Right. Yeah, that's just. Yeah, they would have one guy that they did it. Yeah, that's-
Along those lines, not specifically at that scenario, but I found it's really nice to not ask for feedback when you send a video. Just say, hey, like, is there anything, like, do you give us like an approval to be published, or like keep it simple? And they'll be like, hey, is there anything you think might need to be changed? Because then that opens like Pandora's box, and they're like, oh, actually. But in those situations where it's like higher ups, I mean, pre-production, getting all those that would have a say involved in the beginning.
They would, print that.
So like,
Yeah.
They ordered it.
Yeah.
And it's raised on.
Yeah, I think Greg Hall is starting right now, so.
Okay. All right, cool. Thanks, y'all. I really appreciate it.